In 2017, Anna and Daniel Lewis vanished while hiking in Devil's Hollow, Arizona. For 4 years, no trace was found, until a jogger's dog uncovered human remains near a remote cliff. The discovery reopened a case long gone cold, but only Anna's body was recovered. What happened on that trail, and why did Daniel disappear without a trace? The truth lay buried beneath silence, stone, and one final map. The desert wind rustled dry mesquite branches as Anna Lewis adjusted the straps of her daypack. It was late spring in 2017, and the Arizona sun had not yet reached its peak. The sky above Devil's Hollow Preserve stretched endlessly, a pale blue dome unbroken by clouds. The trailhead parking lot was empty save for their aging silver Subaru, now locked with the windows cracked slightly to release the trapped heat. Anna glanced at her reflection in the passenger side window, a faint outline of a round face, sun-kissed and freckled, framed by a wide-brimmed hiking hat. Her other hand instinctively settled on her swollen belly, nearly 7 months along. Daniel stood beside her, tall and wiry, sipping from a battered water bottle. His sunglasses reflected the canyon's edges and the faint shimmer of heat rising from the trail. "You sure you're okay for this?" he asked, concern shadowing his voice. Anna smiled gently. "It's just a short loop. Doctor said walking's good. Besides, when are we going to get a chance like this again?" Daniel nodded, brushing a strand of dark hair from her cheek, then turning to double-check the trunk. Granola bars, electrolyte packs, a first aid kit, and 2 liters of water each. "Trail map?" he asked. Anna patted her side pocket. "Got it. And the GPS app is running." Devil's Hollow wasn't on most tourist maps. That's what drew Daniel to it. He had discovered it while scrolling obscure hiking blogs, a tucked-away loop trail with a reputation for stunning canyon views and complete solitude. Perfect for a final escape before the baby. The first part of the trail was gentle, flat, gravelly terrain with wide views of chaparral and distant red cliffs. A family of quail darted across the path, and Anna laughed, the sound echoing lightly through the still morning air. "I swear, if this baby comes out with a hiking pole in each hand, it's your fault," she teased. Daniel grinned and snapped a picture of her, silhouetted against the sun with the mountains rising behind her like ancient sentinels. They walked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from over a decade together. Their footsteps crunched in rhythm, occasionally broken by Anna's soft humming. As they neared the first overlook, a rock shelf that jutted out above a sheer drop, Anna slowed, one hand gripping a juniper branch for balance. The view was breathtaking. Below, a canyon stretched like a cracked painting, ochre and gold, and umber streaked with scrubby green. Daniel took another photo, then wrapped an arm around Anna's shoulders. "Crazy to think," he murmured. "This time next year, we'll be standing here with a baby strapped to your back." Anna didn't respond right away. Her gaze stayed on the horizon, where a flock of vultures circled lazily. "Do you ever get the feeling we're being watched?" she asked quietly. Daniel blinked, followed her eyes. Nothing moved but dust and heat. He chuckled. "You've been watching too many true crime shows." She gave him a playful shove. "You say that now, but if we end up on a podcast called Vanished in the Valley," he raised a hand in mock surrender. All right. We'll leave a breadcrumb trail." They turned back from the overlook and continued along the loop, which narrowed and began to rise into steeper terrain. Anna's pace slowed, her breath coming heavier, but she insisted she was fine. Daniel offered her water, and they rested briefly beneath a shaded outcrop. He pointed out a lizard sunning itself on a rock, and they shared a quiet laugh. Around them, Devil's Hollow buzzed faintly with insect life, but no birds sang. No other hikers appeared. It was sometime afternoon when they reached the halfway point. Here, the trail diverged. One path led down toward an old, dried riverbed. The other curved back toward the parking lot. Daniel paused, map in hand. "We could head back," he offered. Anna shook her head. "Let's do the full loop. Slowly. It's our last real adventure, remember?" He smiled, folded the map, and slipped it back into her bag. That was the last confirmed moment anyone ever saw them. Later, When authorities began searching, they found the Subaru parked exactly where it had been left, keys still inside, water bottles half full. The GPS on Anna's phone had stopped transmitting near the overlook. No signs of struggle, no indication of foul play. Just two people who walked into the desert and never came back. When Anna and Daniel Lewis failed to return that evening, no one panicked right away. They were seasoned hikers, responsible, cautious. Anna had texted her sister Rachel that morning, sending a heart emoji and a photo of the canyon trail. It wasn't until the following morning, when their friends couldn't reach them and the car was found still parked in the same dusty lot, that alarm bells began to ring. Rachel called the park rangers first, then the county sheriff's department. The authorities initiated the search that afternoon. At first, it was methodical and hopeful. Search and rescue teams, armed with maps and thermal drones, scoured the immediate area around the trailhead. Helicopters hovered above Devil's Hollow, their rotors churning up dust as infrared cameras scanned the rocky terrain for signs of life. Trained dogs, their noses close to the ground, darted through brush and ravines, following every faint scent trail they could find. Park rangers retraced the couple's likely path, carefully stepping through undergrowth, calling out their names into the vast silence. Volunteers arrived by the dozens, local hikers, experienced climbers, off-duty medics, joining the effort in shifts that stretched from dawn to dusk. Flyers with Anna and Daniel's photos were stapled to every fence post and bulletin board in the region. Gas stations, cafes, ranger stations, even the back of cereal boxes in town became reminders of the couple's unexplained vanishing. Despite the urgency, days passed with no progress. The terrain was unforgiving, jagged cliffs, dry riverbeds, tangled mesquite. Summer temperatures soared above 100 degrees by noon. If they were injured, every passing hour reduced their odds of survival. A local tracker named Jose Ramirez joined the effort on the fifth day. He had lived in the desert his whole life and knew the canyons better than most. He moved quietly, eyes scanning the sand for broken branches, disturbed soil, unusual tracks. "If they're out here, I'll find them," he told Rachel with calm confidence. But he found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no dropped items, not even the faintest clue. It was as if the desert had swallowed them whole. By the end of the second week, frustration gave way to dread. The sheriff gave a press briefing, stating that every reasonable effort had been made, but with no new leads, they were beginning to scale back the operation. Rachel refused to accept it. She launched a public campaign, creating a Facebook page titled Find Anna and Daniel, which quickly amassed thousands of followers. She posted daily updates, shared hiking maps, timelines, photos from their lives, anniversary celebrations, ultrasound images, goofy selfies in the kitchen. "They're not just missing," she wrote. "They're part of family. Someone knows something. Someone saw something." Her pleas resonated. A small community of amateur sleuths and desert survivalists formed online groups to theorize, organize unofficial searches, and raise money for further efforts. Some believed the couple had gotten lost and succumbed to the heat. Others speculated about foul play, a robbery gone wrong, a hidden predator lurking the trails. A few darker theories emerged, suggesting Daniel had planned to disappear all along. Rachel pushed back against those ideas fiercely. "My sister was 7 months pregnant. They were in love. They were planning a nursery. He would never hurt her." But speculation continued, fueled by the lack of answers. Months bled into a year. By 2018, only occasional volunteers still ventured out, mostly on weekends, retracing old steps with fading hope. Rachel continued to organize search weekends. She connected with wilderness experts, brought in cadaver dogs from out of state, even hired a psychic once out of sheer desperation. The woman claimed to sense deep sadness near stone and water. They searched the creek beds. Nothing. As the second year drew to a close, the energy dwindled. The sheriff's department quietly archived the case under cold files. Rachel marked the date on her calendar in silence. 2 years since they disappeared. 2 years of unanswered questions, birthdays missed, holidays hollowed by absence. She no longer expected miracles, But she also never stopped checking her phone each morning, just in case. The last large-scale search happened in early 2019, organized by a group called Echo 47, a nonprofit dedicated to finding missing persons in remote areas. They brought drones, satellite imagery, even ground-penetrating radar. For a moment, hope flickered again. The drones picked up a heat signature in a ravine, and volunteers rushed to investigate. It turned out to be a large desert tortoise basking on a rock. After that, the group moved on to another case in Utah. By mid-2019, even message boards began to go silent. Rachel's daily posts became weekly, then monthly. She kept their photos framed on her living room wall. Friends urged her to move on, to find peace. She nodded politely, then returned to reading satellite maps in the glow of her laptop at night. She had walked the trailhead again that spring. The Subaru was long gone, of course, but she remembered exactly where it had been. She remembered the small stone Anna used to prop open the door while she laced her boots. She found a similar one nearby and placed it in her bag, not as evidence, but as something to hold. Rachel often wondered what they saw in their final moments, if they were scared, if they were together. The silence was the worst part. No calls, no sightings, no trace. The desert had erased them, or so it seemed. Rachel Monroe stared at the wall of her apartment, covered in pinned photographs, topographic maps, printed satellite images, and sticky notes filled with hand-scribbled coordinates. It had been nearly 2.5 years since Anna and Daniel vanished, and still, she found herself waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain that she had overlooked something, a detail, a timestamp, a pattern. Her routine had become both a ritual and a compulsion. Checking the weather patterns in Devil's Hollow Preserve, reviewing archived trail cam footage, emailing rangers she had already spoken to dozens of times. While the world moved on, Rachel clung tightly to the hope that someone, somewhere, knew something they hadn't realized was important. She had become fluent in the language of search grids, learned how to read elevation charts, even took a weekend course in desert survival, just in case she stumbled across a lead too far off the beaten path. She wasn't just Anna's sister anymore. She was her last advocate, her voice when everything else had gone silent. In the quiet corners of the internet, her efforts began to ripple outward. It started when she posted a long thread on a subreddit dedicated to unsolved mysteries. The post, titled, "My Sister Disappeared While 7 Months Pregnant. Please help me find her," garnered thousands of upvotes within hours. Strangers responded with genuine empathy and analytical curiosity. One user created a 3D map overlay of Devil's Hollow using historical satellite imagery. Another, a retired Air Force pilot, offered insight into terrain patterns that might hide a body from overhead searches. Soon, the case took on a digital life of its own. A true crime blogger named Lexi Trent wrote a detailed 2-part feature titled The Hollow Silence, The Vanishing of Anna and Daniel Lewis, which brought national attention to the case and renewed public interest. Rachel was interviewed on podcasts, invited to virtual panels, and quoted in news articles. While none of this brought her sister home, it ensured that the case never fully faded from public memory. One online forum in particular, LostTruths.net, dedicated an entire thread to what members began calling the Lewis case. It became a hub of speculation, research, and support. Thread contributors included amateur sleuths, forensic students, wilderness survivalists, and even a few retired detectives. They cataloged every known movement, every piece of evidence, every possible anomaly in a shared Google sheet that grew to over 100 tabs. Someone created a digital reconstruction of the trail system using drone footage from hikers who had visited the region. Another group tracked reports of skeletal remains found in the Southwest, cross-referencing with Anna's dental records and medical implants. The dedication was astonishing, and though some users drifted away over time, a core group remained fiercely invested. They called themselves the Lewis Search Grid. They had usernames like Coyote Trace, Sun Ridge Eyes, and Anawatch. Rachel didn't know their real names, but she trusted them with her pain, with her memories, with her hope. Despite the camaraderie, not all interactions were kind. Anonymous users occasionally posted cruel theories, accusing Daniel of murder, suggesting Anna staged her own disappearance, speculating about cults, cartels, and cover-ups. Rachel tried to ignore them, but some nights their words crept in, whispering doubts she couldn't quite silence. She reminded herself of what she knew. Anna loved her unborn child deeply, had bought a crib just days before their trip, had sent her ultrasound photo to their mother with the caption, "She kicks like a mule." That wasn't the behavior of someone planning to vanish. And Daniel? He had flaws, sure. He was intense, private, sometimes overly logical, but he adored Anna. There had been no red flags, no fights, no hints of trouble. Still, the lack of evidence, the yawning absence of him at the site where Anna would later be found, gnawed at her. By late 2020, Rachel had compiled a personal database of 87 individual tips, 43 possible sightings, 16 psychic insights, and 5 people claiming first-hand knowledge, none of which panned out. She was tired, worn down. Her job had long since become part-time. Her friendships frayed. She spent most holidays alone, curled up on her couch with files spread across the floor. Yet through it all, she remained unrelenting. She started a fundraiser to offer a reward, $20,000 raised within a month. Flyers were reprinted, new search maps mailed to outdoor retailers and hiking clubs. She even sent letters to prison inmates across Arizona, hoping someone might have heard something, anything. No one responded. In January 2021, a member of the Lewis thread posted an unusual comment. Has anyone considered checking the Northeast Ridge again? Rainfall data shows some minor erosion near Trail Cut 4. Could have uncovered something. Another chimed in. Wasn't that the area where the 2019 team found those plastic fragments? Maybe they missed something. Rachel bookmarked the thread. She didn't know it yet, but this would soon point them towards something far more significant than she ever expected. Something the desert had hidden, waiting quietly beneath sun-baked stone, just beyond where searchers had once passed without stopping. Rachel Monroe didn't sleep the night before her father passed away. The hospice room was dim, quiet except for the rhythmic hum of machines and the occasional crackle of oxygen flow. Her father, Thomas Monroe, had always been a sturdy man, his silence anchored in love that rarely needed explaining. After Anna vanished, he stopped talking altogether, at least about anything other than his garden, the old radio he kept tinkering with, and the weather. But as cancer hollowed him out, taking pieces of him in waves, the silence cracked. It was December 2020, and Rachel had flown in 2 days earlier, aware that this was goodbye. Her father's breathing had grown shallow, chest rising in soft shudders. Rachel held his hand through most of that long final evening, whispering fragments of comfort she wasn't sure he could hear. She told him she'd keep looking for Anna, that she wouldn't let the world forget, that she'd try to forgive herself for not doing more, not knowing more. Around 3 a.m., as the morphine dulled the pain but loosened his grip on time, he stirred. His eyes opened slightly, clouded but alert. Then came the whisper, barely more than breath. She's near, the cliff, number 17. Rachel leaned in, confused. What did you say, Dad? His gaze fluttered, but he didn't repeat it. She watched his eyes slowly lose focus, drifting somewhere between memory and oblivion. An hour later, he was gone. Rachel wrote the words down immediately. Cliff number 17. At first, she thought it might be delirium. There was no known Cliff 17 on any official Devil's Hollow map. But something about the way he said it, calm, deliberate, embedded itself in her. When she mentioned it to the hospice nurse, the woman gave a kind smile, the kind reserved for those grasping at things to hold on to. But Rachel wasn't grasping blindly. She'd spent the last 3 years training herself to notice patterns, to question details. Maybe her father had overheard a ranger mention a numbered overlook. Maybe Anna had described a cliff in a letter once. Maybe Thomas had been carrying this piece of information quietly, ashamed he hadn't said it sooner. Regardless, Rachel refused to let it be dismissed. She returned home with more than grief. She returned with a mission. She pored over every map of Devil's Hollow she could find, even old ranger handbooks from the 1970s archived at the State University. Eventually, buried in an obscure trail maintenance report, she found a mention of Observation Point 17, used internally by a search and rescue team during the 2017 operation. It wasn't public, not marked on civilian hiking maps. The coordinates placed it near a less-traveled offshoot from the White Ridge Loop, an area rugged and remote, notorious for loose shale and sharp drop-offs. It hadn't been part of the main search grid. Rachel's pulse raced as she highlighted the spot, opened a fresh tab, and began emailing the Echo 47 team. The response came within 2 days. "We remember that point," wrote Matt Grayson, one of the team leads. "We couldn't access it safely during the 2019 search because of rockfall. But if it's been a dry season, it might be navigable now." Rachel didn't hesitate. She booked a flight to Arizona and rented a car. She didn't tell anyone, not her co-workers, not even her closest friend. This wasn't something she could explain anymore. It was instinct. It was faith. She packed her old hiking boots, a water bladder, granola bars, a lightweight camera, and a worn photograph of Anna she always kept folded in her wallet. She reached the Devil's Hollow Ranger Station on a windswept afternoon in February 2021. The air was cool, and the sky hung low and gray, diffusing the sunlight into a soft glow. At the desk, she asked about access to the old trail. The ranger, a young woman named Tessa, looked surprised. "Nobody really hikes that ridge. There's no marked trail, and the slope's dangerous." Rachel smiled tightly. "I'm not going for the hike." Tessa hesitated, then handed her a laminated map and circled a section in red. "If you're really going, just be careful. People underestimate how fast things can go wrong out there." Rachel parked at the same lot where Anna's car had once sat, now surrounded by weeds and newer signage. She stood still for a moment, breathing the air that had once held her sister's scent. Then she started walking. The trail to the ridge was rougher than she remembered. The wind picked up as she gained elevation, howling through the canyons like a warning. When she reached the rise where Observation Point 17 should be, she stopped. The view stretched forever, a jagged horizon of red cliffs and brittle desert. She knelt, brushed her hand across the gravel, and began searching for anything unusual: a displaced stone, a scrap of cloth, a glint of metal. Her fingers trembled as she uncovered a rust-colored rock, oddly smooth compared to the rest. Nothing beneath it. She sighed, rubbed her face, and looked toward a narrow crevice where the wind seemed to push against the cliff wall. She stepped toward it, carefully. The crevice Rachel had approached turned out to be a dead end. Nothing more than a wind-cut groove lined with pebbles and brittle brush. But she left with something intangible. A renewed sense that the desert was still holding something close, that the silence surrounding her sister's disappearance wasn't the end of the story, but the edge of it. She returned home exhausted, dust still clinging to her boots, and resumed her ritual of reading through message boards and tip emails. What she didn't know was that just 3 weeks later, someone else would stumble upon a truth that had eluded so many for so long. In early June 2021, Carl Moore laced up his boots for what he thought would be a simple Sunday trek. A retired field biologist and lifelong desert enthusiast, Carl had lived in nearby Mesa for over 30 years and spent most weekends exploring the less-traveled paths of Devil's Hollow Preserve. That morning, the sun had barely crested the ridge when he loaded his truck with a hydration pack, his field notebook, and a bag of liver treats for his loyal golden retriever, Buddy. The two of them had a rhythm. Carl hiked, Buddy sniffed and scouted, occasionally darting off trail, but always circling back. They weren't seeking anything in particular, just the rhythm of solitude, the calm that came from walking beneath wide skies and stone. That day, Carl decided to veer off the main White Ridge Loop, drawn by an old deer trail he hadn't noticed before. It curved around a narrow rise, past a shaded ledge, and opened into a dry arroyo choked with loose gravel and sun-baked shrubs. The air shimmered with heat, but the shadows along the rock face were cool, damp in places, still holding traces of spring runoff. Buddy was especially alert, tail stiff, nose pressed low to the ground. Carl called after him, but the dog didn't respond, just trotted forward with increasing urgency. Moments later, Buddy stopped abruptly near a cluster of large stones and began to dig furiously, dirt and small rocks flying in every direction. Carl approached with a sigh, expecting to find a buried critter or perhaps the remains of someone's discarded lunch. But then Buddy emerged with something long and pale clenched gently in his jaws. At first, Carl thought it might be a large stick bleached by the sun, but as he stepped closer, a chill sliced through the heat. It wasn't wood. It was bone, smooth, porous, unmistakably human. Carl froze, his heart pounding, instincts colliding between scientific curiosity and primal dread. He crouched carefully, examined the surrounding soil, noted the disturbed layer where Buddy had dug. The bone was weathered, one end sheared cleanly, the other frayed. It looked like a femur, adult, not child-sized. He immediately clipped Buddy's leash and pulled out his phone. With shaking hands, he called 911 and described the find, giving precise GPS coordinates. "Please don't move anything else," the dispatcher instructed. "A unit is on the way." Within the hour, 2 patrol vehicles and a small forensics team arrived. They cordoned off the area, gently removed the bone, and began a careful excavation of the immediate vicinity. Carl stood back with Buddy beside him, watching as gloves sifted soil, cameras clicked, and whispers passed between investigators. One technician crouched near the cliff wall, brushing away dirt with a small tool, then straightened slowly. "We've got more," she said. What they uncovered over the next 2 days would bring the case of Anna and Daniel Lewis back into the national spotlight. Under the rock shelf, partially protected from erosion, lay scattered remains. A partial skull, fragments of ribs and spine, and small personal effects that time had failed to erase entirely. A rusted water bottle, a faded blue hair tie, the remnants of a lightweight hiking pack, its fabric disintegrating but the zipper still intact. One technician lifted a curved titanium piece from the dirt and placed it into an evidence bag. "Looks like surgical hardware," he murmured. "Probably a knee replacement." As the sun dropped behind the ridgeline and shadows stretched long over the canyon, Rachel's phone rang 600 miles away. She didn't recognize the number at first and nearly let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. "Ms. Monroe," the voice said. "This is Detective Alan Shun with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. We believe we've found your sister." The words settled over her like a fog, numbing and dense. She didn't cry. Not immediately. She listened as he described the find, the approximate location, the presence of items that matched those Anna had carried. "We're still confirming through dental records," he said, "but there's also a smaller set of bones. We believe she was still carrying the fetus." Rachel's breath hitched, a small sound escaping before she could stop it. "And Daniel," she whispered. A pause. "No sign of him yet," the detective said. "We're expanding the search grid, but at the moment, it's just Anna." Rachel sat in a quiet room at the sheriff's office, the walls bare except for a single faded map of Devil's Hollow pinned behind the desk. Detective Alan Shun, a man in his early 50s with tired eyes and a voice that never rose above steady, sat across from her with a folder open, gloved fingers sifting through the documentation. He didn't speak immediately, allowing the weight of the silence to settle between them, a courtesy or perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of the gravity of what he was about to say. Rachel's fingers curled around a lukewarm paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Her eyes were dry, but her chest felt like it held a stone. "The medical examiner has confirmed the remains," Chun said finally. "The titanium knee component matches the serial number from Anna's surgery in 2015. There's no doubt. It's her." Rachel nodded once, slowly. She had expected this, braced for it, told herself she was ready, but the finality of those words pierced something in her that had stayed intact until now. "We also found fetal remains," Chun continued, more gently. "Approximately 28 weeks gestation. The bones were partially sheltered under her pelvis, suggesting she may have fallen or been positioned that way when she died." Rachel looked down at the table, her breath shallow. She imagined Anna's final moments, alone, perhaps afraid, the desert closing in around her. She tried not to picture her sister crying out, or worse, staying silent, because no one was near enough to hear. "Do we know how she died?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Chun hesitated. "There's trauma to the back of the skull, one significant blow, consistent with blunt force. But it's impossible to say for certain whether it was accidental or intentional. There's no sign of defensive injuries, no fractures on her hands or arms. She was partially buried by sediment and runoff, likely from storms over the years. They may have shielded her remains, but also obscured some evidence." Rachel pressed her lips together, absorbing each sentence like a slow dripping poison. They showed her a tray of personal items recovered from the site: the rusted water bottle, a shredded piece of fabric they believed to be part of her hiking shirt, a bracelet of small wooden beads still clinging to its elastic band. But it was the sonogram photo, creased, stained with soil, barely visible, that shattered her. They had found it folded tightly in the back pocket of what was left of Anna's shorts, protected somehow from the elements, a last trace of what she'd carried with her, literally and emotionally, into the desert. Rachel leaned forward, fingers trembling as she touched the plastic sleeve they'd placed it in. "That's the second sonogram," she whispered, "the one she was going to frame." The room stayed silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Detective Chin closed the folder but didn't move it. "We've found no trace of Daniel so far," he said. "We've expanded the search radius another mile. There's no indication he was ever there." Rachel turned toward him, eyes narrowing with instinctive defensiveness. "That doesn't mean anything," she said quickly. "He could have been swept down a ravine, or separated, or—" She stopped, unwilling to say the things others had whispered since the day Anna vanished. She nodded slowly. "I'm not saying he hurt her. But given that only one body was recovered and the circumstances suggest an isolated fatal injury, well, we have to consider every possibility." Rachel didn't answer. She stared at the map behind him, tracing the faded red lines that marked trails, wondering how many secrets lay just beyond their edges. She wondered whether Daniel had seen something, someone that day, whether Anna had slipped or run, or confronted something neither of them had expected. Her thoughts were interrupted as Chun stood. "We're continuing forensic analysis," he said. "The Me will release a full report within the week. In the meantime, we'll notify the rest of the family and prepare a press statement. I'll call you before it goes public." Rachel nodded again, her voice caught somewhere between grief and numbness. "Thank you," she said automatically, though she couldn't quite explain what she was thanking him for. Outside, the Arizona sun hit her like a blow. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, eyes unfocused, the sonogram still in her hand. The world moved around her. Cars passed, someone laughed down the block, a cicada buzzed nearby, but it all sounded like static. She didn't know whether to scream or collapse or disappear. Instead, she walked to her rental car and sat behind the wheel until the sun began to lower behind the buildings. That night, she returned to her motel, spread the recovered items across the bed, and stared at them until dawn. The bracelet, the photo, the water bottle. Artifacts of a life cut short, of a story still unfinished. Somewhere out there, a piece was still missing, and in the quietest part of her mind, she could hear Anna's voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside her. The forensics team returned to the site 2 days after the initial discovery, this time equipped with ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis tools. Detective Chun oversaw the operation personally, now convinced that the scene required deeper scrutiny. It wasn't just a body left in the open by time. It was a carefully chosen location, shielded by nature and likely missed by every previous search because of a freak convergence of concealment and environmental change. The cavity where Anna's remains had been found wasn't immediately visible unless you were low to the ground and looking straight into the shadows cast by a small overhang. The rock formation above it jutted outward like a protective brow, and beneath it lay a shallow indentation framed by hardened silt and compressed dust, as if someone had once scooped out a resting space and then left the rest to wind and time. One of the technicians noted sediment layers above the remains, with textures indicating runoff, likely from flash floods or seasonal hailstorms. "It looks like she was hidden," he said to Chun, squinting into the dark recess. Then the rains came and buried it just enough to make her invisible. Chun stood silently, absorbing the implication. If Anna had simply fallen and died where she landed, her body would have been more exposed, partially scavenged, scattered by animals. But this suggested intent. Someone had chosen the spot, placed her there, then left. Whether it was Daniel or someone else was still unclear, but the methodical nature of the burial unsettled him. As they worked, another officer flagged Chin down. "We found something about 30 meters northeast, under a rock outcrop, mostly buried." They led him to a shallow depression, where a shredded fabric strap stuck out from beneath some loose stone. Carefully, the team dug around it, revealing the remnants of what had once been a hiking backpack. The nylon had rotted, discolored and fragile, but some of the contents remained. Inside, wrapped in a soft, mold-stained baby blanket, they found a small plastic bag containing a bracelet, wooden beads strung on elastic, with faded pink and white letters spelling out Emmy. Chin exhaled slowly, holding the bag as if it might disintegrate. "That's what they planned to name the baby," Rachel whispered when he showed it to her later. "Emmy." Anna wanted something soft, simple. She'd already bought baby books with that name written on the covers. The discovery of the backpack reignited questions that had been simmering since the body was identified. Why was it placed so far from Anna? Why wasn't it buried with her, or kept nearby as if by a grieving parent? Why had someone taken the time to fold the blanket, to seal the bracelet as if preserving a memory, but then abandoned it in the open, half covered by rubble? The area had clearly suffered a collapse at some point. Tree roots had torn through loose shale, and the upper edge of the slope bore scars from erosion. But even accounting for that, the bag's position felt deliberate. This wasn't lost in a fall. One of the forensic experts concluded. This was placed. Rachel stood at the scene days later, watching silently as markers were placed around the site. Flags flapped gently in the hot breeze, outlining where each item had been found. She didn't speak until everyone else had left. Then she knelt near the backpack, gloved hands brushing against the dust beside it. "You kept her close," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Even if no one else ever knew. You were holding on to her." Whether she was speaking to Anna or to someone else entirely was unclear, even to herself. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in her motel bed, the baby bracelet beside her on the nightstand in its evidence bag, glowing softly under the bedside lamp. Her mind looped through possibilities, turning over every angle. If Anna had fallen by accident, Daniel would have gone for help, left markers, returned with assistance. He would have hidden her body or walked away from her pack. Unless he had been injured too. Unless he had never left the canyon alive. But if so, where was his body? Why had only one set of prints, one set of items, one scene been uncovered? And what if someone else had been out there that day, someone neither of them expected? A stranger on a trail no one used. Someone who watched from the cliffs. Detective Chun had his own theories, and the discovery of the bracelet only deepened them. He returned to the site with a photographer and re-examined the overhang where Anna had been found. They searched for additional signs, impressions, bone fragments, clothing fibers, anything that might tell them how she had arrived in that spot. The surrounding area yielded nothing definitive, but two things stood out. First, the rocks directly above the burial cavity showed marks, scratches, slight but noticeable, suggesting that something had been dragged over them. Second, wedged deep in a crevice nearby, they found a torn strap with a metal buckle, still clinging to a rusted carabiner. The buckle matched the backpack's missing lower harness. Chin had it bagged and sent to the lab, but the significance was clear. Someone had handled that pack with care, then discarded it. The separation of the remains and the items didn't feel random anymore. It felt controlled. Rachel, sitting across from him days later, stared at the evidence photos. "You think she died there?" she said, gesturing at the cave. But the bag was moved. Chin nodded. Or someone didn't want the two found together. She closed her eyes. So they left a grave and a message. She didn't explain what she meant, and Chin didn't ask. But both understood that Devil's Hollow was still hiding more than it had revealed. The excavation area, now officially designated a protected scene, had yielded everything it could, at least everything related to Anna. Over several weeks, the forensic team combed every meter within a 100-yard radius, documenting, scanning, and cataloging, yet no material, trace, or biological evidence linked to Daniel Lewis surfaced. Not a fragment of clothing, not a strand of hair, not a drop of blood. No watch he was known to wear, no ring, no boot tread distinct from Anna's smaller, narrower gait. The ground beneath and around Anna's burial site told a story of stillness, not struggle. She had either died there in solitude or been placed there post-mortem by someone who left no trace of himself behind. The pack with the bracelet labeled Emmy had offered a deeply personal glimpse into her final days. But even that object, though found 30 meters from a resting place, bore no prints, no male DNA, no indication it had passed through Daniel's hands. To law enforcement, this absence became its own presence, an invisible outline of a man who should have been there but wasn't. Detective Chun stood over the evidence table, staring at the itemized summary. Beside him, the lead forensic pathologist shook her head slowly. "We've reprocessed everything with secondary luminol and infrared," she said. "Nothing. It's as if he never went on that hike." Chun didn't reply immediately. He ran his finger along the edge of the timeline pinned to the whiteboard. 2017. Last seen at Devil's Hollow with Anna. 2018. Rachel's first independent search expedition. 2019. Private drone scans commissioned by volunteers. 2021. Discovery of remains. In 4 years, every clue had pointed to Anna's journey. Daniel had become a ghost, not in death, but in silence. If he died out there too, the pathologist continued, his remains should have been found close. Unless something removed them, or he left. That was the word no one wanted to say. Left, as in walked away, as in abandoned, as in vanished without explanation, while Anna and their unborn child lay buried in the dust. Rachel, when told of the absence of Daniel's presence at the scene, went still. Not angry, not weeping, just quiet in a way that terrified Chun more than any outburst. "He didn't just disappear," she said after a long pause. "He was part of this. He was there. He wouldn't have left her, not like that." But her conviction, once solid, had begun to crack under the pressure of evidence, or lack thereof. She thought back to the voicemail Daniel had left her the day before the hike. "We're heading out early. Don't worry about us. We'll be back before sunset." There had been no hesitation in his voice, no darkness beneath the words. But now, with Anna's body found in isolation, that message rang differently. Rachel began poring over Daniel's old messages, photos, even his digital footprint. She contacted the data retrieval firm that had once helped her recover deleted files from Anna's phone, asking if they could do the same for Daniel's social media history. But most of his accounts had gone inactive shortly after the disappearance. His emails hadn't been accessed since May 2017. His bank accounts remained untouched. There was no sign of life or death. Speculation online reignited. Theories multiplied. Some believed Daniel had staged the entire hike, planned a murder, and escaped under cover of the wilderness. Others suggested the opposite, that Anna had been targeted and Daniel had been silenced along the way. A third, more chilling theory proposed they had been ambushed by someone entirely unknown, and Daniel's body had either been hidden better or consumed by the desert. Yet these remained just that, theories, without bones, belongings, or even digital trace. Daniel's fate had become the most persistent vacuum in the case. Detective Chun had pursued every possible angle. He reopened Daniel's employment records, interviewed former coworkers at the engineering firm where he had worked in Phoenix, tracked a series of minor financial anomalies in the months leading up to the hike, withdrawals of cash in small increments, all from different ATMs, always in person. It wasn't enough to call it suspicious, but it was enough to raise his eyebrows. He even traced a lead from a truck stop in Gallup, New Mexico, where a man vaguely matching Daniel's description had been seen weeks after the disappearance. The security footage was too grainy to confirm, and no identifying details were recorded. But the possibility hung there unspoken. Had Daniel survived, only to vanish into anonymity? In desperation, Rachel turned to more unconventional approaches. She contacted a retired behavioral profiler, hoping for insight into Daniel's potential mindset. The profiler, a soft-spoken woman with decades in federal service, reviewed their relationship history and Anna's journal entries, then said simply, "If he loved her as deeply as you believe, then something broke that day, either in him or around them." Rachel didn't know how to process that. She began questioning her memories, reevaluating small moments. An argument she'd overheard once about finances, a cryptic text Anna had sent her a week before the hike. "Dan's acting weird lately." Not bad, just distant. Was that distance a symptom of guilt or grief? Planning or unraveling? The questions mounted, but no answers came. The only thing Rachel knew with certainty was that Anna had died alone, hidden from the world, and Daniel, her partner, her protector, had vanished so completely that even time refused to acknowledge him. And in the quiet that followed, the desert seemed to tighten its grip on the rest of the story. Detective Chun stood before the small gathering of investigators, maps and evidence photos displayed across the briefing room wall. The case no longer just about loss, but now brushing against motive, psychology, and cold intent. The absence of Daniel Lewis, physically, digitally, emotionally, had shifted the tone of the investigation from tragedy to suspicion. Though there remained no forensic link directly implicating him, the absence itself was now regarded as circumstantial evidence. Chun, a man not prone to theory without ground, was the first to admit the possibility. Daniel may have murdered his wife. The idea simmered quietly within law enforcement circles, never declared publicly, not without more, but it made its way into the internal case brief under a heading no one liked reading aloud. Homicide, spousal. The report outlined what little they had. A secluded trail, an expected delivery date that could have added stress, no other footprints or signs of third-party involvement, and a backpack discovered separate from Anna's remains. The lack of Daniel's body, combined with the disappearance of every item associated with him, began to feel less like misfortune and more like intention. When Rachel was called in for an updated interview, the suspicion was unspoken but present in every pause, every question that drifted just close enough to guilt. Did Daniel ever talk about feeling overwhelmed? Had Anna ever expressed fear, even subtly? Did she seem nervous before the hike? Rachel answered calmly, her face betraying no shock. But when Sean finally said, "Some of us believe Daniel may have planned this," her voice rose without permission. "No," she said flatly. "You don't know him. He would never." Her conviction was firm, but doubt had begun to press against its edges, thin as breath. In the weeks that followed, she reviewed her own archives again, looking for reassurance. She watched old home videos of Anna and Daniel laughing over dinner, planning their nursery, testing strollers in a crowded store. Nothing suggested darkness. But then, what does murder ever look like until it's already happened? The press didn't need confirmation to fan the flames. True crime podcasts picked up the story. One YouTube creator released a video titled "Desert Deception. Did Daniel Lewis plan to vanish?" It reached 2 million views in under 72 hours. Speculation bloomed like wildfire, fueled by the gap of 4 years between the disappearance and discovery, and the haunting detail that Anna had been partially buried while Daniel simply ceased to exist. But it wasn't until a blogger named Lexi Trent, already familiar to the case through her early articles, posted an update that things truly escalated. In her post titled "Digital Ghosts," the internet trail of Daniel Lewis, she detailed how she had begun scraping old discussion threads, specifically those relating to survivalism, off-grid living, and missing persons. Using a paid archival search tool, she located a now-deleted Reddit account tied to an Arizona IP address that had once posted on a subreddit about starting over. The post, dated February 2017, for months before the couple's disappearance, read, "Hypothetically, if someone wanted to disappear without leaving a digital trail, what would be step 1? Asking for a writing project, of course." The thread had dozens of responses, ranging from practical to paranoid. Lexi matched the username to a handle that had also posted on hiking forums, one of which Daniel had subscribed to from his known email. While not conclusive, The digital fingerprint was enough to raise eyebrows. Rachel read the post with hands clenched, fury creeping up her spine. She didn't know if it was a joke, a fantasy, or something far worse. "You're all twisting this," she snapped during a phone call with Lexi. Writers ask weird questions all the time. He was detail-oriented. It doesn't mean he was plotting anything. But Lexi's tone remained careful, almost sympathetic. "Rachel, I understand how it looks. I really do. But it's more than just a question. That account disappeared 2 weeks before Anna and Daniel did. The timing isn't random." Back at the sheriff's office, Detective Chun reviewed the metadata Lexi had forwarded. He had a tech unit verify the IP correlation, which didn't lead to a smoking gun, but did confirm proximity to Daniel's known apartment complex. Another search of archived logs showed Daniel had checked out a library book on wilderness navigation in March 2017 and accessed a digital guide to emergency foraging the week after. These data points, individually harmless, began to suggest premeditation when arranged like puzzle pieces. Yet even then, the picture remained incomplete. There was no note, no confession, no witness, no weapon, no body. Without Daniel's remains or testimony, everything hovered between theory and certainty, just out of reach. Rachel continued to defend her brother-in-law publicly, even as the tide of opinion turned. "If you all spent half as much time looking for what actually happened as you do chasing ghosts," she wrote in a late-night forum reply, "you might find someone else was up there that day. Someone you've overlooked." Her words sparked renewed debate. A small contingent of amateur sleuths shifted their focus back toward third-party involvement, suggesting poachers, drifters, or even other hikers might have crossed paths with the couple. One user pointed to a string of thefts from trailhead parking lots that same season, wondering aloud if a confrontation had escalated. But each path of inquiry ended the same, in sand, in wind, in silence. What haunted Rachel most wasn't just the idea that Daniel had killed her sister. It was the possibility that he hadn't, and had still chosen not to come back. That he might be alive, watching from a distance, too afraid or ashamed to face what was left behind. Every time a tip came in, a man matching his description was seen in Utah. Someone said they recognized him at shelter in Reno. Her heart twisted. Because hope, once poisoned by ambiguity, didn't bring comfort. It brought paralysis. She had seen Anna's bones. She had buried a sister and a niece she never got to meet. But Daniel? He remained elsewhere, or nowhere. And that space, that terrifying undefined space, only grew wider with every passing month. With growing public interest and the sudden spike in media coverage following the Reddit post revelation, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office had no choice but to officially reopen the Lewis case. The announcement came with a carefully worded press release, detailing new developments, unspecified digital activity, and a call for information from anyone who might have encountered Daniel Lewis after June 2017. Yet even as the case was reclassified from missing persons to active investigation, every lead continued to dissolve into nothing. The tech forensics team dug deeper into old ISP logs, phone records, financial data, and even obscure VPN trails, but each search yielded the same result: silence. It was as if Daniel had erased himself. His email accounts had long since deactivated. His cell phone last pinged near Devil's Hollow on the day they vanished. No new credit activity. No verified sightings. No calls, texts, job applications, or medical records. Every thread ended abruptly, like a book with its final pages torn out. The chilling implication: if Daniel had wanted to disappear, he had succeeded, with surgical precision. Detective Chun, reviewing a printout of their findings, leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "It's not just a cold trail," he said to the task force. "It's like chasing a shadow through fog." Meanwhile, Rachel, who had kept her focus sharp despite the emotional toll, returned to the box of Anna's belongings that had been returned to her. She'd been through the contents dozens of times: photos, receipts, old letters, a folded pair of baby socks. But now, with a fresh sense of urgency, she reopened it and forced herself to move slower, see differently. That's when she noticed the map. It was a standard USGS hiking map of the Devil's Hollow region, creased at the edges and sun-faded in places, but on the lower right quadrant, near the margin where the print ran to blank space, a red ink circle had been drawn around a cliff face labeled Whispering Cliff. The handwriting was undeniably Anna's, tight, slanted, marked with a small arrow and the initials Del. Rachel stared at it, heart accelerating. She couldn't recall the spot ever being mentioned in search briefings. She opened her laptop, checked her search grid files, and confirmed it. Whispering Cliff had been just outside the main perimeter, designated too dangerous for team entry during the original search because of rockfall risk. No cameras had flown over it. No cadaver dogs had passed through. No one had looked. She drove straight to the station, map in hand, and placed it before Chun. He examined it, running his thumb along the ink circle. "We missed this," he said quietly. It could mean nothing, but the look in his eyes had changed. Or, Rachel added, it could mean everything. A week later, Chin authorized a new recon team to explore Whispering Cliff. Drones were deployed first, capturing high-resolution scans of the terrain. Nothing appeared unusual at a glance, but the topography showed multiple overhangs, potential hiding spots. When the team hiked in on foot, carefully roped and equipped for sudden slides, they found signs that someone had been there. A small fire pit long extinguished, buried beneath layers of dust and char nearby. Wedged between two boulders, a piece of blue nylon caught one ranger's eye. It was part of tent, molded, brittle but real. Inside it, they found an empty canteen, a rusted multi-tool, and a paperback novel, Into the Wild by John Krakauer. On the inside cover, faint ink red DL. Rachel received the call at dawn. Her breath caught as Chun described what they'd found. "It doesn't confirm anything," he cautioned, "but it proves he was there." After, her legs gave out, and she sank onto the floor, phone still pressed her ear. So he hadn't died with her. He'd survived, long enough to read, to light a fire, to leave behind a breadcrumb no one would find for years. But why hadn't he come back? Why leave her in the dark, buried and alone? Chun believed he might have planned his escape from the start, that he had brought the supplies, mapped the area, waited for the right moment. Rachel couldn't believe that. She didn't want to. She imagined a different version. Daniel watching Anna fall, panicking, thinking she was dead. Maybe he ran, traumatized, convinced no one would believe him. Maybe he wandered for days before giving up. Maybe he lost himself not out of guilt, but grief. And yet, a darker version tugged at the edges of her thoughts. One where Daniel had made a choice, had snapped under the pressure of impending fatherhood, or an argument gone too far. The evidence was not enough to arrest, not enough to acquit. It sat in a limbo, just like Daniel himself, missing, presumed guilty by some, innocent by others. Online, the community kept building theories. People tracked potential sightings. Reddit threads ballooned with speculation. Podcasts revisited the story in multi-part retrospectives. The man who vanished himself, one called him. Desert Secrets. The Whispering Cliff Theory, said another. But none of them could answer the simplest, cruelest question. Why? Why Anna died while Daniel disappeared? Why a man with no known history of violence would become the center of such a haunting narrative? Why a baby's bracelet was left to rot under stone, while its father, if alive, chose to become a ghost? Rachel knew some questions had no closure. Some stories never resolve. The Lewis case, even reopened, might never be solved. Anna's bones had been buried, and Emmy's name had been whispered, but the man who could explain it all had vanished into myth. And in the final folder of the case, behind every photo and map, lay one word scribbled in black ink: unresolved. If you found this story gripping, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more real-life mysteries that leave you breathless. What do you think happened to Daniel Lewis? Was it a tragic accident? Or was something far darker? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts and location in the comments below. We read every one.